Who were the top quarterbacks going into the 2015 college football season? It's hard to believe that was a decade ago now, as at the time, conference realignment and the transfer portal had not taken over, and we were fresh into the 4-team playoff system. This afternoon, I stumbled across an article that talked about the top 5 preseason quarterbacks for all 5 Power 5 conferences, and today, I wanted to talk about that. We're basically going to go through who were the top 25 quarterbacks going into the 2015 college football season, and then how they ended up. But before we get started, if you're a big fan of college football, be sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a like if you can support today's video, and let me know what player, team, topic, or situation I can cover next. Now, let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so the first conference I want to start out with is the Big 12, and the guy at the top of everything was Trevone Boykin. He was apparently the Heisman frontrunner going into the 2015 college football season, and that was after a tremendous 2014 season in which TCU almost made the college football playoff. Boykin would end up having unbelievable hype, and in total in 2015, he would finish with 3,575 yards, 31 touchdowns, and 10 interceptions, while also rushing for 600 yards and 9 more scores on the ground. He was slightly underwhelming, he suffered an injury, and then got arrested before their bowl game. The rest of his career was plagued by legal troubles, and no one doubts how good Boykin was on the field, but he did not end up winning the Heisman Trophy after all. The second guy to the Big 12 was Baylor quarterback Seth Russell. He was a newfound starter going into 2015, and in total, he would finish with 2,104 yards and 29 touchdowns. This guy was absolutely electric, and Russell never really had an NFL career, but he was good for one more good season after that at Baylor. The third guy they had on the list was Mason Rudolph, who would now be going into his first year as a starter after being a blue chip recruit coming out of high school. Rudolph would end up delivering in his first season as a starter, as he would finish with 3,770 yards, 21 touchdowns, and 9 interceptions, and then as we know, he got better. He had over 4,000 yards in 2016, nearly 5,000 yards in 2017, and then he was drafted by the Pittsburgh Steelers, where he has been an on and off starter and a perennial backup. Back in the day, Texas could not figure out the quarterback position like they can now, as going into the 2014 season, Tyrone Swoops was getting a ton of hype for the Longhorns. After a great 2014 season in which he broke out, he would flame out in 2015 in a big way, as while he did run for 451 yards and 12 touchdowns, he only passed for 500 yards. Swoops was definitely more of an athlete than a quarterback, and that would show. He would have success as a dual threat player in 2016 before he'd have 2 catches in the NFL with the Seattle Seahawks. Swoop's career did not go according to plan. And the guy ranked at number 5 in the Big 12 was some kid from Texas Tech by the name of Baker Mayfield. After walking on and having a good season with the Red Raiders in 2013, Mayfield had to sit out the entirety of the 2014 season, and then in his first year as a starter, he threw for 3,700 yards with 36 touchdowns. Mayfield then ended up passing for 4,000 yards in 2016, nearly 5,000 in 2017, got drafted number 1 overall, went to the Browns, and is now with the Buccaneers. It's safe to say they completely missed on him, as he ended up turning out the best even over Trevone Boykin, and it's definitely interesting to see how it panned out for him. Heading over to the ACC, the talent was a lot deeper there, as at number 1 they ended up having Deshaun Watson. As we all know, Watson was one of the top high school quarterbacks ever in the state of Georgia, and he'd go on to be tremendous as a true freshman for the Clemson Tigers. He would absolutely blossom in his first full season as a starter, throwing for 4,104 yards with 35 touchdowns. He'd improved that to 4,600 yards and 41 touchdowns in 2016, and he also had nearly 2,000 yards and 20 combined touchdowns on the ground. Watson would end up getting drafted with the 12th overall pick, starred for a while in Houston and in Cleveland, and has then been surrounded by some legal issues which I won't go into. Considered one of the best triple option quarterbacks ever, Justin Thomas is currently second on our list today. Back in 2014, he became the starter for the Yellow Jackets, and in 2015, he was supposed to have an incredible season. Unfortunately, he was underwhelming, as all of his numbers dropped, and he only finished with 1,300 yards passing with 13 touchdowns, and then about 500 yards and 6 touchdowns on the ground. From there, Thomas would start one more season before he tried to make it in the NFL, but things would not work out for him. He started the year highly regarded, but would end up flaming out. The next guy on the list is Brad Kaaya, and I remember when this guy had number 1 overall pick hype. He started as a true freshman for Miami back in 2014 and was expected to improve tremendously in 2015. While he cut down on turnovers, his numbers went down across the board, finishing with 3,200 yards and 16 touchdowns. He ended up not living up to that number 1 overall pick status, as despite throwing for 3,500 yards and 27 touchdowns in 2016, he'd be drafted in the 6th round by the Detroit Lions and then would bounce around from team to team and never quite made it. NC State used to be a pipeline for quarterback talent, and Jacobi Brassette was ranked as the 4th best returning quarterback in the ACC back in 2015. Spending his first 2 years at Florida, Jacobi would transfer to the Wolfpack for the 2014 season and passed for 2,600 yards and 23 touchdowns. He was expected to take another jump in 2015 in his final year of eligibility, and he'd be really solid. He finished with 2,600 yards and 20 touchdowns, and this was good enough to get him drafted in the 3rd round with pick number 91 by the New England Patriots. From there, he bounced around as a starter with both the Patriots and the Colts, and now is considered a long-term backup and one of those guys who's bouncing around. Finally, at number 5, we have Marquise Williams, the quarterback from North Carolina. Back at this point, Larry Fedora was the head coach of the Tar Heels, and after 2 straight starting seasons in 2013 and 14, Williams was expected to be one of the better quarterbacks in the country in 2015. He'd end up having his best season ever, as he threw for 3,000 yards with 24 touchdowns, and also ran for nearly 1,000 yards and 13 touchdowns. He helped North Carolina almost get to the college football playoff, or he would then try to go to the NFL, but would never end up making it onto an active roster. He was the definition of a good 4-year quarterback. The SEC looked a lot different back in 2015, as big-time quarterbacks didn't just grow on trees. But the guy we're going to first talk about is Dak Prescott, who was supposed to be one of the better quarterbacks in the country in 2015 after a marvelous breakout season back in 2014. Mississippi State almost made the college football playoff and had their moment, and in 2015 he'd actually improve. He passed for 3,700 yards with 29 touchdowns and also ran for 10 more touchdowns on the ground. While Mississippi State fell off a tad bit, Dak would still get drafted in the 4th round with the 135th overall pick to the Cowboys, and Prescott then has continued all this success with a long, steady career in Dallas. The same cannot be said for Jeremy Johnson, who was picked to be the 2nd best quarterback in the SEC that year. After being a 4-star recruit coming out of high school, Johnson was groomed to be the next big thing, and he was going to be a first-year starter for Gus Malzahn in 2015. He was one of those September Heisman-type players, but after a couple early bad games, Johnson was eventually benched, and he finished with just over 1,000 yards passing and 10 touchdowns before he never really played again and never made it off to the NFL. Sad for him. In 3rd, we had Kyle Allen, who as a 5-star recruit coming out of high school was expected to be the next big thing for Texas A&M. After playing a little bit in 2014, Allen kind of made a jump in 2015 as he threw for 2,200 yards and 17 touchdowns, but it just wasn't quite good enough, as he would then sit out a year and transfer to Houston for the 2017 season, where he only had about 700 yards passing. He ended up going undrafted, but Kyle Allen has made a name for himself in the NFL, as he has spent time with 5 different NFL franchises and has made his way as a backup. Going into the 2015 season, Josh Dobbs had a ton of hype, as Butch Jones had Tennessee football moving in the right direction. Dobbs started at the end of the 2014 season, and in his first year as a starter in 2015, he'd throw for 2,300 yards and 15 touchdowns, while also having 11 scores on the ground. He'd have his best statistical season in 2016, as he had just under 3,000 yards and just under 30 touchdowns, and helped Tennessee get off to a rocket start before flaming out in the last month. Dobbs would then get drafted in the 4th round with the 135th overall pick to Pittsburgh, and just like Kyle Allen, this guy has been everywhere, as he's also played for 5 different NFL teams, and will also be a journeyman backup. Okay, so the last guy in the SEC was Brandon Allen, as he was a 4-star recruit coming out of the state of Arkansas and decided to stay home and play for the Razorbacks. Allen had become a starter after the 2014 season, and then would take the next jump in 2015, as he would throw for 3,400 yards and 30 touchdowns, and was one of the better pure passers in the SEC and in the country. This was enough for him to get drafted in the 6th round, as the Jacksonville Jaguars would take him at pick number 201. Like many of these other guys on the list, he is now with his 3rd NFL franchise and is also a career backup. This SEC list had a ton of backup quarterbacks on it. Heading over to our 4th power conference in the Pac-12, the guy running the show at the top was Cody Kessler. He was considered the Heisman favorite out of the Pac-12, as he was a 4-star recruit coming out of Bakersfield, California, and became one of the better USC quarterbacks in recent memory. He combined for nearly 7,000 yards and 60 touchdowns in his prior 2 years, so it was expected for him to be even better in 2015. Kessler would end up passing for 3,500 yards and 29 touchdowns, and while he didn't win the Heisman, he was still good, as he was then selected in the 3rd round with pick number 93 by the Cleveland Browns. Kessler would then play 17 games in 3 years in the NFL and passed for just over 2,000 yards. He didn't end up living up to the hype, but Kessler was a really good quarterback at USC. Right behind him was another guy in Kevin Hogan, as Hogan was another one of those guys who slowly developed, as he started as a freshman in 2012 and then started the next 2 years in 2013 and 14 before finishing with nearly 3,000 yards and 27 touchdowns as a senior. Hogan was a really good quarterback for those Stanford teams, and then he would get drafted in the 5th round with pick number 162 by the Kansas City Chiefs. Hogan would also play for the Cleveland Browns and ended up having just over 600 yards in his whole career. Ranked 3rd in the Pac-12 was a quarterback by the name of Jared Goff. After taking over as a starter in 2013, Goff combined for nearly 8,000 yards and 60 touchdowns in those first 2 years starting, so there was good reason for him to have hype going into 2015. Goff would end up finishing with 4,800 yards and 43 touchdowns as a senior, which is why he went with pick number 1 in the 2016 NFL Draft. He started out with the Los Angeles Rams, where he was there for 5 years, and he was definitely solid. He finally took the next step when he was traded to Detroit, and in total he has over 35,000 passing yards and 222 touchdowns in the NFL. Dang. Behind Goff was a guy who unfortunately became a bust in Anu Solomon. Coming out of the state of Hawaii, Solomon would arrive at Arizona in 2014, and he finished with nearly 4,000 passing yards in his first season as a starter. In 2015, he once again had good numbers, as he had 2,600 yards and 20 touchdowns, but then he struggled to get on the field in 2016, transferred to Baylor, and ultimately flamed out, and was never heard from again. I have no idea what caused the fall off, but he was really good his first 2 years in Tucson. And the 5th ranked guy in the Pac-12 was Vernon Adams Jr., as he would now be taking over for Marcus Mariota. After spending 3 years at Eastern Washington, Adams would transfer to Oregon for the 2015 season and beat out Lockie for that starting job. Adams was definitely solid, as he finished with 2,600 yards and 26 touchdowns as a passer, and while he wasn't perfect, he had an impossible bar to hit with Marcus coming right before him. Adams then tried to make it in the NFL, but ultimately ended up in the other feeder leagues. And finally, as we move over to the Big Ten, they sort of did something interesting here, as they ranked all 3 Ohio State quarterbacks in the top 3. I'm not quite sure that's how it works, but starting at number 1 we had Cardell Jones, who had one of the more intriguing stories after the 2014 season, starting in their college football playoff run. Cardell was unfortunately never able to really get better, as while he did pass for 1,400 yards and 8 touchdowns in 2015, he just never had long-term success. But he was still drafted in the 4th round by the Buffalo Bills, where he would play in 1 total game. Cardell will go down as a bust, but he ended up having his moment back in 2014. Ranked right below him was the guy he replaced in Braxton Miller. Braxton Miller was a huge recruit coming out of the state of Ohio, and this guy had unbelievable hype. He started the 2011, 2012, and 2013 seasons before then getting injured in 2014. In 2015, he'd end up moving positions, as he'd finished with 26 catches for 341 yards and 3 touchdowns, and then he was drafted in the 3rd round by the Houston Texans. With the Texans, he played in 21 games in 2 years, but only had 2 touchdown passes, and unfortunately was out of the league rather quickly. The 3rd Ohio State quarterback on the list was JT Barrett, as he filled in for the starting position in 2014, throwing for 2,800 yards and 34 touchdowns before he ended up getting hurt and replaced by Cardell. In 2015, splitting time with Jones, he finished with 992 yards and 11 touchdowns, before then having nearly 6,000 yards and 60 touchdowns in his next 2 years, but it wasn't good enough for him to go off to the NFL, as he went undrafted. Barrett was the definition of a good college quarterback, and ultimately, these guys were wrong. I have no idea why they ranked all 3 of those quarterbacks to be the top guy in the conference when a guy like Connor Cook existed. After being a 3-star recruit coming out of high school, Cook would blow up at Michigan State in 2013, throwing for 2,700 yards, and then throwing for over 3,000 in 2014. He definitely should have been the top quarterback on this list, and he would deliver, throwing for over 3,000 yards and 24 touchdowns in 2015. He would then be drafted with the 100th overall pick in the 4th round by the Oakland Raiders, where he ended up playing in 1 game in Oakland, throwing for 150 yards and 1 touchdown, before he ended up flaming out. Connor Cook was a really good college quarterback, and again, probably should have been number 1 on the list. Nobody on this list had more hype coming out of high school than Christian Hackenberg, as he finished his high school career at Fork Union Military Academy and then took over after all the fallout at Penn State. After being the starter his true freshman year in 2013, he'd then throw for nearly 3,000 yards in 2014, making him one of the better quarterbacks going into the 2015 season. Ultimately, Hackenberg was just alright, as he passed for 2,500 yards and 16 touchdowns, and just never got better. Still though, NFL scouts saw so much potential in him, as he was taken with the 51st overall pick in the second round by the New York Jets, but Hackenberg literally never did anything. He never registered a stat with the Jets and flamed out of the NFL rather quickly. So yeah, going into the 2015 season, there are some names that have gone on to be stars in the NFL, some long-term backups, and some guys that you probably totally forgot about. But what do you guys think? Who are you surprised was on this list? And who is your favorite quarterback for the 2025 college football season? Be sure to let me know down below, leave a like if you want to support today's video, subscribe if you're new, and check out one of the videos on the end screen. Hope to see you guys again soon, but until next time, peace.